Hello, and welcome to Replay Value. Psycho Pass, in its first 2 episodes, established Sybil's effect on society and then on individuals. Episode 3 continues to add nuance to the discussion, continuing to hammer home this ideological battle. And to do this, Psycho Pass decided to make Sybil's presence simultaneously massive and invisible in the 3rd episode, by creating an environment where our main characters are removed from Sybil, which in turn creates a gaping hole that is impossible not to recognize. The opening of the episode reminds us what a normal police procedural would entail. There's a very film noir aesthetic to not only the room and the actions, but the shot composition and color choices, which is a good way to visually cue the audience to the inherent contrast between the people who are called detectives and the ones who actually do the detective work. An officer who needs to be strong in order to fight is unnecessary in a world where only the police have guns that can paralyze targets for them. Kogami is a fish out of water, and this sequence also conveys the first glimpses of Kogami's obsession, a blurry photo and a hardened glance, all without a single word. We undergo a tonal shift from the hard-boiled detective segment right back to the shiny futuristic utopia with self-driving cars and holograms as we introduce the case for the episode. At a drone factory, one of the workers has been killed, the 3rd in the last year. As the team undergoes a tour of the factory, the manager states that almost every element of the drone production is handled by machines, except for the final checks, which have always been handled by humans, which is why there are workers living in the plant removed from the internet and the Sybil system to prevent hackers from affecting the drones. The Dominators don't work in the plant, nor can the workers utilize the internet or any of those modern conveniences to distract themselves from work, which brings this episode to a societal and technological place that the audience can understand. It also creates a problem for the PSB, or the Public Safety Bureau, since they can't scan the workers to determine whose crime coefficient indicates the person behind the murders. Of course, the plant manager is not interested in finding the murderer, since their operations are much more important than any employee's lives. The economic impact of having their employees step outside the plant to be scanned for only a few minutes is too large for the manager to assent to, instead insisting that it's an accident until proven otherwise. Masayoka, of course, notes that the brutal nature of the so-called accident suggests a human element driven by rage. As the team investigates, finding out that one of the employees is the target of intense regular bullying, there's this brilliant exchange where the manager states that that employee might have been sent there by Sybil because of the role that he fulfills in helping the other employees release their stress. Which is to say that Sybil is willing to make someone miserable for the sake of the public good. And the manager, Kogami states, was placed there because he is someone willing to overlook that. This, of course, refocuses the Sybil system as that of a utilitarian framework, at least when it comes to people's role in society, in that it takes actions that maximize happiness for the greatest number, even if that means sacrificing the individual. And we can see this thought process permeate throughout many of the members of society, including the manager, who values profits over people, to use Akane's words, because productivity is the element they're trying to maximize. This is a look at the effects of actions and not on the actions themselves. And this is fundamentally where justice and morality come into play. We talked about this in episode 1 with the woman, and episode 2 not only with the stalker, but also with the inherent concept of latent criminals. But it's not as clearly expressed there in the cast as it is here. If one is to make moral judgments about actions, clearly placing a person to be an emotional and literal punching bag is not one. And not investigating the death of a human being simply because it gets in the way of productivity wouldn't be just. Episode 3 makes it really simple. Of course we want to bring the killer to justice, and the bullied guy shouldn't be in that position. Our current society proclaims to value the individual, and without Sybil in play, we can understand this social situation super well, because it's relatable to our society. The audience is likely in agreement with Akane, who wants to try Kogami's plan to force out the killer. It's the bullied guy, by the way, even though that puts her at odds with Ginoza. Ginoza and the manager are the embodiment of wanting to uphold the system even at the expense of justice. Akane is in this middle ground, not really beholden to one side or the other as of yet, while Kogami and Masayoka are firmly opposed to a system that doesn't place justice at the forefront. Ginoza's reasoning, calling Akane a fool for making what he views as a preventable mistake, makes complete sense in hindsight of the show, foreshadowed by Kaguri laughing at Akane regarding Masayoka and Ginoza, and I think is one of the best arguments for how brilliantly layered Psycho Pass is. Through 3 episodes, it would seem as though the show is setting up a scathing indictment of utilitarian thinking. But what Psycho Pass does unbelievably well is how it adds incredible amounts of nuance to the discussion. So while things may seem black and white right now before the show ends, there's going to be an almost infinite amount of gray. So it should go without saying that we'll be coming back to this philosophical discussion of morality and justice, probably talk a lot about Kant and duties, but I think that moment's a little off in the future, and we have an episode to end. With the plan enacted, with Kogami now acting cruelly towards the bullied worker as opposed to his earlier supportive actions, an indication of his moral code that wants to seek out injustice regardless of its forms and right them in whatever manner is necessary, we see that Kogami's predictions are right on. Indeed, the bullied guy is the murderer, and that he has a belief that in the search for truth in matters of life and death, one must risk their own life. Whether this is a true belief he holds, or one that merely is convenient for his desire to make adrenaline-pumping decisions, is yet to be seen. Certainly he shows no qualms with putting other people at risk, like Akane, to ensure a deduction on his own terms, compared to using Sybil's judgment to determine a result. Dragging the man to that second floor location would have been infinitely safer and less destructive, though it would not be as simple as seeing a crime in progress, in which Kogami can just use his own eyes to determine the man's guilt. If you don't want to rely on Sybil, then Kogami's decision makes sense, though notably, he still requires Sybil to capture the target, a reminder that without Sybil, dominators are useless. With the episode ending, Akane reflects on whether Kogami is a hunting dog or a detective, and we see the brief image of the manager watching the events play out on screen. Justice has been dealt at the expense of 2 drones, 1 worker, and factory damage. One almost has to wonder how the manager feels, as though he is, in this moment, the embodiment of Sybil's society, almost a faceless silhouette against the bright holograms. The final question that we're left to ponder is if Sybil's decision to leave this man here to be bullied as he kills in retaliation is actually for the public good. Sybil actively created a killer, the antithesis of what a heavily structured society should attempt to do. Does this one isolated circumstance and seeming error, given the system's tendency to rotate the bullied person out after a set amount of time, undermine the utilitarian argument entirely? It doesn't, but it's certainly another nail in the proverbial coffin. That's the video in a nutshell. I'm going to quickly talk about some insane foreshadowing this episode had in the context of the entire show, so if you don't want to be spoiled, feel free to click off now. Spoilers coming in 3, 2, 1. The 2 major elements are pretty clear, and I alluded to them above so that people who haven't seen the show won't be spoiled, but will still be able to tie them in later. The first is that the drones still require a human check at the end, which is obviously a pretty clear allusion to the nature of the Sybil system, and the second is the fact that dominators don't work without Sybil's judgment, even if the wielder knows something to be true, which is extremely relevant with episode 11. I can't wait to get to those episodes, but don't comment about them below unless you're throwing up spoiler tags. Until then, thanks for watching.